And last but not least, we have Pieter van Engelen. He holds a master's in logic and computability and jazz trumpet. He currently teaches entrepreneurship at the Conservatory in Arnhem, math, logic, and programming in Roosendaal. And he is our keynote speaker, so please welcome Pieter van Engelen.
Before I begin, I have a small remark. I will talk a lot about Turing and about artificial intelligence. After this talk, or in the course of the evening, I will put out something on my website to, well, if you want to read more material on Turing, source material or books, I've got them referenced on my website for afterwards. So that's a small remark to begin with. Now, allow me to take you on a journey. Would you please close your eyes and keep them closed for 2 minutes? It's a small request. Imagine going back almost a century to the year 1926. Keep your eyes closed, please. Imagine how the world looked and felt back then. Written communication was through letters, no email. Having a telephone in your house was something for the important or rich people, no mobile phone. There were computers, but they were humans calculating everything by hand on paper with a pencil. And the devices we now call computers simply didn't exist at that time. And now imagine a boy, aged 14, going to a public school in England. The boy is clumsy, is untidy. He is non-conventional or even awkward in his social interaction. People used to call him a dreamer. He already has got the resilience and talent to attack intricate problems in a unique way. And 4 years earlier, at the age of 10, he received a gift for his birthday. The gift was a book called Natural Wonders Every Child Should Know. It is a book explaining several wonders of nature in a language understandable for kids. The book told about how the brain basically worked, how embryos grew, and that plants had some kind of organization in how they developed into an actual plant. It is laced with beautiful images. And the boy's name? Alan Turing. Here's a picture of him. This boy became one of the greatest scientists in the 20th century. In the next 20 minutes, or even a bit more, I will explain to you why he became one of the greatest scientists. I will also explain how his influence is still felt today. In the first phase, I will focus on Alan Turing, his life and his sexual identity. In the second phase, I will use it as a basis use the basis provided in the first phase to put forward some thoughts and questions with the hope they will kickstart the panel discussion. Okay, Turing as a scientist. Our boy, he went through public school and was admitted at Cambridge University in 1931. And he studied the mathematical tripos, one of the most difficult and renowned mathematical studies of the world at that time. He developed a talent for tackling complex open problems. Often he developed profound mathematical theories showing a deep understanding of the problems at hand. And now we go to 1936. He's been studying for quite a few years. And he independently answered an important question in mathematics, posed by the godfather of mathematics at that time, David Hilbert. The question boiled down to the following: is there an algorithm to say whether a statement in first-order logic is true or false? Well, let me explain. First-order logic is a system of reasoning. Think of it as a language specifically for mathematics. And it was believed by Hilbert and his disciples that you could capture all mathematics in first-order logic. Well, therefore, an algorithm would become quite handy. So, there was one problem. The notion of an algorithm wasn't yet mathematically defined. Well, Alan defined just that and came up with the concept of an A machine. Later, this theoretical machine would be called a Turing machine and form the basis of what is now called a computer. With this precise notion, mathematical notion of an algorithm, he laid a foundation of computing science as we know it today. And furthermore, he sparked into existence hitherto unknown nuances in the realm of mathematical logic. Here's a short excerpt of his seminal article on computable numbers. Oh, yes, and that question of Hilbert, Turing answered it, and he answered it negatively. After Gödel's incompleteness theorems, he put the last nail on the coffin of Hilbert's program, which in a philosophical way is good news. Gödel and Turing provided work for humans on mathematics into eternity, which is good news for mathematicians, right? So, why is this Turing machine so important? It's got one important property, and that it is capable of interpreting or mimicking itself. It's like a snake biting its own tail. It is the equivalent, for those of you who are in the know of programming, it's the equivalent of an eval function in any hip programming language, or eval or exec function. And a machine having this capability of interpreting itself, Turing called it a universal machine. And that's one of the most important core concepts of computing science, universal machines. This has one important consequence, that you don't need a new machine to build a new machine for each specific task. Instead, you can build one universal machine and give it a new task time and time again, without having to build a new machine, which is quite cost-effective, I think. But please think of this. Before the existence of digital computers, electronic computers, logicians already could reason about what could not and could be computed. Let that sink in for a minute. So before we actually have a computer, logicians or mathematicians already know what it can do and what it can't do. That's the field of computability theory. And computers, they're pervasive. They're all everywhere. Think of your telephone, your tablet or computer, or, well, even your washing machine. It's got a processor which is, in effect, a universal machine. That's a strange concept, right? You put your laundry in a washing machine, and it's basically still a Turing machine. So, with that, Alan Turing started computing science. But, well, then a war came. And during the war, Alan Turing played a vital role in breaking the German codes. It cannot be underestimated how vital his role was. And in order to actually help breaking those codes, he learned how to design electronic machines that could check the huge amount of possible codes at breakneck speed. In typical Turing style, as we saw before, in order to bring down the number of possible codes to check, he developed a part of the theory of Bayesian statistics just on the go. And, well, due to the secrecy of all those codes and hush-hush, he didn't publish this theory. And today, in big data, that's the buzzword of today, big data, Bayesian statistics are an important tool of analysis. Yes, so that's 2-0 for Alan Turing. And as a diversion, well, he didn't only break codes during the war, he also had some free time. And in his spare time during the war, he wrote a program to play chess together with his friend David Champernowne. They called it, very nicely, TuroChamp. But, well, lacking an electronic digital computer, because it didn't exist at the time, they used pen and paper to calculate the moves. And, well, I don't know whether there are chess players out here or who know how to program a chess computer. In chess terms, it was a very, very unsophisticated program. It only calculated 3 moves ahead, but nonetheless, it was the first program, and they used to calculate it by pen and paper. These are the first rays of artificial intelligence shining through. And he also had discussions about the philosophy of mind. He contemplated the idea that a future electronic brain, so it was already in his head that it could exist, but that a future electronic brain could be considered the same as a human brain if it would operate the same or show similar behavior. And this is a forebode for the Turing test. Remember, it's only 1941. And after the Second World War, his experience in mathematical theory and in designing electronic machines put him in the ideal position to start working on England's first computer at a government-funded laboratory. And at that time, he already saw it was possible to build in an electronic brain. This is an actual image from Natural Wonders. Alan wrote that this brain, essentially a binary neural network, was very much like the brain of an infant. He called it unorganized. And for the brain and the infant to actually acquire knowledge, they, in his eyes, needed to be trained. Well, there's more artificial intelligence there. In 1948, we zoom through time, right? He started work at the University of Manchester. And in his Manchester period, he delivered an oration and subsequently an interview. And I think his words are worth quoting here. Not until a machine can write a sonnet or compose a concerto because of thoughts and emotions felt, and not by the chance fall of symbols, could we agree that a machine equals brain. That is, not only write it, but known that it had written it. No machine could feel pleasure at its success, grieve when its valves fuse, be warmed by flattery, or be made miserable by its mistakes, or be charmed by sex, be angry or miserable when it cannot get what it wants. This is only a foretaste of what is to come, and only the shadow of what is going to be. We have to have some experience with the machine before we really know its capabilities. And it may take years before we settle down on the new possibilities. But I do not see why it should not enter any of the fields normally covered by the human intellect and eventually compete on equal terms. This is 1949, and Alan Turing is already saying these words. We put a successor function on the year, and we go from 1949 to 1950. The number of digital computers in the world is still below 20. The interaction with these beasts, room-filling beasts, was through small fading dots on a screen, big switches, bad valves, and slow teleprinters. It was an agonizing experience working with computers back in 1950. But, well, Alan did it. And again, as in his wartime philosophical diversions, he started pondering the question, how can we tell whether an electronic brain is equal to a human brain? Well, remember I said teleprinters, those are just typewriters and small screens. The interaction with such an electronic brain would be quite different from the interaction with a human brain. So he needed, as he said it, to level the playfield. And in order to do this, he adapted a 19th century parlor game called the Imitation Game. The basic idea of the Imitation Game is to place a man and a woman behind a curtain. A third person is sitting at the other side of the curtain. And by asking questions to the person behind the curtain, the player needs to find out which one of the hidden persons is a man and which one is a woman. But, yeah, communication takes place via typed messages. So you couldn't recognize it by handwriting. I'm a math teacher myself in a high school, and I can recognize a girl's handwriting from a boy's handwriting. And in order to make the game more attractive, one of the hidden players is obliged to lie, which gives it a logical twist. And the other needs to tell the truth, but they don't know which one is lying, which one is telling the truth. Well, there you have it, a 19th century Victorian parlor game. But Alan adapted this game. He replaced the lying player with an electronic brain. An interaction takes place through terminals, or as we now call it, a chat window. And this game is what's called a Turing test. It aims to reveal the computer amongst the hidden players. He introduces this test in a seminal article, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And in his book, Turing's Tango, Mr. Benny Mols, one of the panel members, wrote an excellent chapter on the Turing test and how it fared in the past 67 years. Even today, the Turing test is relevant. But there's a last chapter here in Alan Turing's scientific work. He ventured into a new terrain, and for the outsider, a radical change. But for Alan, a logical step. But we still don't know why. And in 1951, he published an article on, what's this, morphogenetics, the mathematical basis of how and why plants grow in the form they grow. Why do they grow this way? And this step in his career can partly be explained by looking back at the book he received as a 10-year-old. In Natural Wonders, the author describes how plants grow from seed to full plant. And in typical Turing style, we're going 3 or 4-0 again, he again addressed a vague, or at its best, an ill-defined problem. And he laid a mathematical basis of what now is called nonlinear dynamical theory. You should imagine how many biology students are pestered by nonlinear dynamical theory. But this is the last chapter in his scientific career. Now let's focus on Turing and his sexual identity. We go back to public school, where he fell in love with a fellow pupil who was 1 year older than Alan. His name, Christopher Morcom. Although Alan wouldn't call it in love, he actually wrote to his mother about the sheer adoration he had for him and his work, and felt a better person being in his presence. Well, then you know enough. Unfortunately, Christopher died in 1930, leaving Alan mourning for several years. And while studying at King's College, he shyly became more open about his sexuality. But beware. It was very dangerous to be open about homosexuality in England at that period of time. It was punishable by law. Imagine this, punishable by law to be a homosexual. Therefore, discreetness was very important. After the war, Alan became more outspoken about his sexual orientation, and that's a risk. And in the period when Alan started working in Manchester, he had a relationship with a young Manchester man. And when police in 1952 learned of this relationship, he was charged and convicted for acts of gross indecency. That's unimaginable, but it happened. And instead of going to prison, he agreed for a period of a year on injections with the female hormone estrogen to neutralize his libido. Let that sink in. The hormone treatment did lower his libido, but did not take away his sexual identity. Because police were actively surveilling him, he could not form relationships in his own country. He found his desired contacts in Norway. But unknowing to his surroundings, he had continued to work for the British government on cryptography. And this put him in a situation where he was in possession of state secrets. A convicted homosexual in possession of state secrets. That's one of the reasons why police were continually surveilling him. Now, it's not difficult to imagine how nervous they were, the Secret Service was, when he went to Norway. But this dark cage of surveillance and his undeniable sexual identity were very, very much incompatible. This irreconcilable tension most probably led him to eating the cyanide-poisoned apple. He died in his home in Manchester in June 1954. Let's step in our time machine and zoom back to our current time. It was 1954, now we're back in 2017. What's the current state of affairs in artificial intelligence? Well, the current state of affairs, it's big, and it's big business. And in those past years, some remarkable milestones have been reached. I'll highlight a few. For instance, 6 years ago, a computer from IBM called Watson, it beat all human players in the hardest TV quiz of the US, Jeopardy. And remember, Watson is still basically a Turing machine. Well, actually a Turing machine on steroids, but still only a universal Turing machine. Its unique ability to look up information and reason faster and deeper than the human players were the factors that contributed to its victory. That's Watson, artificial intelligence. 1996, I was at university back then, studying computing science, and I read the news that world champion Garry Kasparov, world champion chess, was beat by IBM's Deep Blue. That was the talk of the day in our canteen. But if you think chess is a hard game, we already knew back then. There was a professor saying to me, chess, it's an easy game to beat. Go, that's the game to beat. Well, here you go. Last May, Google's AlphaGo beat the world champion KG. And most remarkable is that Google, the creator of AlphaGo, went further with AlphaGo. They created AlphaGo Zero. That's current state of affairs, very much current state of affairs. And treating it like an unorganized machine, that AlphaGo Zero, they only gave it the rules of the game Go, basic rules, and they let it play against his daddy, AlphaGo. So AlphaGo Zero was trained by AlphaGo. And within 40 days of learning, AlphaGo Zero was capable of beating AlphaGo. So AlphaGo beat the world champion, and AlphaGo Zero beat AlphaGo. This is going quite fast, right? But there are two things important for artificial intelligence about the AlphaGo family. First, there's the training, the process of training for the match. The first AlphaGo was already taking steps in the game humans could not explain. Why is it taking these steps? Well, basically, AlphaGo was becoming smarter than a human player at playing the game of Go. And secondly, AlphaGo Zero, it wasn't trained by human-played games, it was trained by AlphaGo, just by competing against AlphaGo. So, that's the next step. Oh yeah, and the Jeopardy computer? After its victory, it went on to learn how to help doctors in suggesting possible diagnosis based on the pathology. So, what do supercomputers do when they retire? We turn them into something useful. Likewise, in designing new cars, computers, phones, bridges, the computer plays an important role in tackling the complexity and size of the design process. So artificial intelligence is here, and it's basically extending our own intelligence and capability. But what's left for us? Well, there are opinions that creativity is one of those domains that's exclusive to humans. In a way, Alan Turing addressed these opinions in his article where he introduced the Turing test. The objection he called Lady Lovelace's objection. Read the article, it's beautiful. In basis, Turing did not exclude computers to be able to show creativity. And now, IBM's research department, or research center, has a whole department devoted to computational creativity. How can we learn computers to be creative? There's a renowned chef cook in service for IBM, and he's creating new recipes together with artificial intelligence. I don't know how they taste, but I'm very curious. So I'll get back to some examples of my own discipline. As already said, I'm a jazz trumpet player, so I'll get back to music. It's already known for quite a few years that computers are able to mimic specific styles of composers. David Cope is one of the pioneers in that field. But in 2012, a composer in a computer called Jamus was commissioned to write a piece for the London Symphony Orchestra. Why? Jamus had developed its own style and was capable of writing moving music for a full classical orchestra. And the year 2012 wasn't a random year. The composition was commissioned to honor the fact that Turing was born, at that time, a century ago. And being recorded by a renowned classical orchestra, that's a validation in my eyes. But that's only composed music. My personal interest lies with improvised music, say instantly composed music at this time, where the musician, human or not, reacts in the moment with musical expressions. And for a computer to be able to improvise, it not only needs to be able to adapt and develop its own style in a relative slow learning environment, it needs to be able to react instantaneously to its musical surroundings. Lo and behold, there are computer systems capable of co-improvising with a single musician. It's called Improtech. Check it out. It's really funny. You should see the reaction on the face of the musician when the computer starts co-improvising. Well, I think viewing from my discipline and then using an N is one argument, it's safe to say that creativity is not a domain exclusive for humans. Well, we, however, can use computers to help us create, even create art. It's happening already, and we'll call it computer-augmented art. Again, what's left for us after creativity is gone? The experts tend to agree. Emotions. In his TED Talk, Mr. Mols questioned the need for machines with emotions. We don't need a machine that's suddenly outraged or depressed. And that reminds me of Marvin, the paranoid android from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a robot that's utterly depressed and subsequently is too funny. Think of it, why it's funny. So, when I personally perceive a piece of art, it will not, or it will evoke, it could evoke emotions with me. And posing it more general, we can create new art in its broadest sense with the help of artificial intelligence. But it's the judgment on that art that is for humans. Well, let me give you an example. Again, imagine this London Symphony Orchestra performing the composition of the computer composer. And now imagine a person in that audience. Let's call him Alonso. Alonso is a frequent visitor to performances by this orchestra. He grew up in a family where a broad taste in classical music was considered essential to life. Orchestral music makes him feel comfortable and reminds him of the Friday evenings when his father used to play recordings conducted by the great Herbert von Karajan. This short story of emotions evoked by a computer composer is exactly the small core of emotions a computer is not able to reproduce at this moment in time. These emotions are very unique to Alonso. Even more so, this argument applies to each and every person in that audience. So, I talked about human emotions being a bastion that AI has not reached. Like a small core inside the complex structure of human intelligence. A small core currently incompatible with computers. And I see a poetic parallel between this concept and the life of Alan Turing. During the course of his life, Turing's emotions became incompatible with the system he lived in. I would say, let's not bite that apple and continue our discussion and search for the essence of that small core and embrace the current incompatibility. I thank you for your attention.